You're listening to the Educated Cowgirl Podcast, Season 2, Episode 9. Hey Cowgirls, are you looking to buy a new horse, start a new horse business, or purchasing a horse property? Well, then this episode will be very helpful to you and help you prepare it and make sure all transactions go smoothly. Even if you answered no to this question, you will still find this episode very educational for the future. We have come a long way in the industry from the days when horses were sold over a handshake or some kind of verbal agreement. Last episode, Cassidy and I talked about insurance for your horse, whereas this week's guest and myself are talking about protecting yourself from a legal standpoint during the pre-purchase phase of the transaction. We all hope that when buying a horse or running a business, nothing will go wrong. But unfortunately, life doesn't always go the way we wish it would. And there are people who sometimes take advantage of the emotional side that comes into play when you buy a horse. And it is important to do your homework and know that sometimes it is okay to walk away. We buy horses because we love them. But as my guest Polly Hay will talk about, you must still think of it as a business transaction. Polly is a lawyer based out of the Bay Area of California and has co-owned and managed her practice for just about 20 years now, specializing in equine law, helping people to bridge the gap of how they are represented in horse sales or business dealings in the equine industry. She really has so much knowledge and passion for horses, the law, and the industry to help educate not only her clients, but all horse owners, to help them to get the information they need to protect themselves before it goes to the courts and expensive legal fees. I learned so much from my conversation with Polly, and we even talk about the book she wrote that I believe can help the industry even more to improve our dealings between trainers, owners, riders, and even with our friends. Get your notebooks ready, and let's get into my fascinating conversation with Polly. Disclaimer, the following podcast features Polly Hay of Hay and Hay Attorneys at Law. Miss Hay is licensed to practice law in California and Tennessee. The content of this podcast is for informational purposes only and does not constitute legal advice. Listening to this podcast does not create an attorney-client relationship. For legal advice specific to your situation, please consult a qualified attorney licensed in your jurisdiction. Hey, and welcome to the Educated Cowgirl Podcast, hosted by yours truly. My name is Abby Carpenter, and I am a cowgirl and equestrian through and through. I started this podcast wanting to make more of an impact in the equine industry. That's why I am making it my mission to help promote the industry to the public through sharing my love for horses through education and bringing other experts and professionals onto the podcast with me to discuss important topics that impact the horse community. So whether you are a crazy horse lady like me, want to learn more about horses, or want to learn more about the industry, you've come to the right place. On this podcast, we will be talking about ownership, horsemanship, fitness, faith, breeds, and so much more. We believe that it doesn't matter what type of saddle you ride in or the breed of horse you may ride. We all contribute to this community to make it great, and that there is always something to learn from the back of your horse. So grab a coffee and get ready to take some notes, and let's get started. This is the Educated Cowgirl Podcast. So welcome back to the show, everyone. I am very excited about the lady I am talking with today, as she truly has such a passion for helping owners and the equine industry, not only with their legal needs, but also in working with them to help them understand what they need to know to be successful in their horse businesses. Thank you for sitting down to talk to me today.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.
Great. All right. So if you could please introduce yourself, what you do, and a fun fact about yourself.
Sure. My name's Polly Hay, and I'm one of the founding attorneys at Hay and Hay Attorneys at Law out in the Bay Area of California. And we've been practicing equine law since 2006. And a fun fact about me is that my mom put me in front of her on a horse when I was 6 months old, and she had me canter on my own when I was 2 on my second birthday. Not sure, having had kids myself, how that worked, but that's at least the tale she tells me. So
yeah, Yeah, I think parents were a little more lax on the rules back in the day, but
Yeah, this was back in the late 70s. So yeah, very I think I did not wear a helmet and I was in my birthday dress according to her. So very different than what it is today.
yeah, yeah. All right. So we talked about this a little in our initial phone call, but can you share more about your background with horses, your journey as an equine lawyer and the road to become one, and what inspired you to go into equine law and how that led to your business?
Sure. So, like I said, I pretty much grew up on a horse. My mom was a horse trainer, and so I spent all of my free time at the barn. And throughout the years, I saw a lot of horse transactions, go on. Some of them turned out great for her clients, and others didn't. And I saw that there was a real gap in terms of how people were represented on the legal sense of it. And so when I was in law school, I realized I really wanted to figure out a way to combine my two passions, horses and the law.
Mm-hmm.
And my father and I had always had a dream of working together. He was a district attorney in Santa Clara County here, and he had an opportunity to retire in 2006. And we opened up our practice, Hay and Hay, together, and have been practicing exclusively equine law since then. So that's really how it started, and how we got into it. And I feel really lucky because I do get to do something that I truly love every day and still be in the industry and help people in the industry.
That's great. So, when you say your mom was a trainer, was she like a hunter jumper trainer or?
Yeah, so she was trained classically in dressage, but her business was in the hunter jumper uh A circuit realm in California, Northern California, really. But she also had a unique program in that she offered lessons on lesson ponies and lesson horses as well, so you didn't have to own your horse to ride with her. And so I sort of, yeah, learned to ride. I would usually get the school ponies that no one else could ride.
Yeah.
So that was how the I got my own ponies or horses.
I
So
feel
yeah,
like that's the way it goes with trainers' kids sometimes is they kind of get thrown on the naughty ones.
exactly, exactly. Sometimes those are the best ones though, once you figure them out.
Yeah, yeah. All right. So before we get into the conversation, as someone who went through all the schooling, do you have any advice for a student or young person who might be interested in pursuing equine law?
Yeah, I think one of the best things I did was in undergrad, I majored in American Studies, which is really an interdisciplinary major, with a lot of writing. Obviously, in the legal field, you do a lot of writing,
Mm-hmm.
but that really gave me a broad background. And then in law school, unless you go to, like, for instance, University of Kentucky, that's really the only school I know of law school that really has equine specific classes. I think it's more about taking general classes so that, contracts, that sort of thing. So you really understand, have a broad understanding. But I think what is so valuable, at least for myself, practicing equine law is my industry knowledge growing up in the industry and understanding the ins and outs of the horse world, because then I can apply the law and the horse stuff together, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, no, no, that makes perfect sense. Because I know horse people want to know that the people handling their business know what they're talking about. So yeah,
Exactly.
that makes total sense. All right, so almost two years ago, about you did something very exciting. You wrote a book, talking about important things trainers, owners, riders need to know, whether it's a sales contract or liability, property issues. Now, I'm still reading it, but so far it's super easy to read. It doesn't read like a textbook or a college book at all. You almost write it like a story, which I think makes it a lot easier for people to read. My question is, what inspired you to write this book? Where did it start? What was the process of writing it and the publishing and distribution for it?
Sure. Yeah, so it really was born out of the desire to help people. And I was having the same conversations over and over with people where they say, I wish I had found out about you before I got myself into this mess, or I wish I had known about you before I bought this horse and could have had someone to ask those questions to. And I think a lot of times, at least what I've experienced, is that within the industry, there's obviously new people coming into the industry all the time. And usually, a lot of times, they're coming in because they have a child that rides. And so they want to do what's best for their child and they're super excited. But there's not a lot of guidance on how to navigate the industry. And
Mm-hmm.
so, really, the book was born out of this idea that, hey, if I can give people a resource of things to think about before you buy that first horse, or say you're with a trainer and you want to change trainers before you make that change so that you've sort of at least had a few things to think about, you might end up in a better situation. You might read, one of my checklists and go, oh, I'm going to do this before, I might. It's surprising, but there's still people that maybe don't know to get a pre-purchase exam. And so, oh, I need to get I need to ask what that is. So that's really how the book came about, really as a way
Mm-hmm.
to just get people thinking about it. And I do appreciate your comments about easy to read. That was one of my goals as well, because I didn't want it to be a textbook. I wanted it to be something that you could flip to a certain chapter and read that chapter and read it and not have to read the whole book if you didn't,
Yeah.
if you didn't want to or whatnot. So that was really how it was born. The writing process, it took quite a while to get to that point. And
Yeah.
then we published it using through Amazon.
Mm-hmm.
And so that obviously I used a company that helped me get it to, helped with all of the design of the cover
Mm-hmm.
and all of that. So that's sort of how we got it out there. And I'm really
Yeah.
happy. I hear lots of people enjoy that they say that they enjoy reading it and have learned something. And that was really my goal with it.
Yeah, no, and I think, I mean, not that you college kids couldn't use it in a course because, like, it would definitely make it a lot more interesting where they would actually want to pay attention in not only in class, but actually it'll help them after school. So you touched on this, but what else do you hope people will get from the book, and how do you hope it will help the industry?
I hope that it helps the industry by ultimately leading to less amounts of disputes, or people ending up in situations that they didn't expect, because they know the right questions to ask ahead of time. I think that's probably my biggest hope of what it could do, is really educating people so they can ask those questions and know really what they're getting into ahead of time.
Yeah, yeah, less misunderstandings.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So you told me that you are licensed to practice law in California and Tennessee. Were those just the two states you've lived in, or why did you choose them? What are the biggest differences in laws and practices that you've seen with equine law between the two?
Sure. So I'll start. First, I've been licensed in California since 2004. So that was the first jurisdiction I got licensed. I've born and raised in California. And and I went to law school here in California. So that
Mm-hmm.
was sort of made logical sense. Um, and then I became licensed in Tennessee a few years ago. I have several clients. Tennessee actually is amazing, beautiful horse country. We've bought a pony for my kids out of Tennessee, and I have several clients that have horse properties out there. So getting licensed there was a way to help continue to serve them.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm sure most of your readers understand this, but you can only practice law in the states that you're licensed in.
Yeah.
So you would have to get licensed in every state if you wanted to be able to practice everywhere. So that's how I chose California and Tennessee.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of like big differences and whatnot, I think one of the big ones, and I mentioned this in the book, is that California and Maryland are the only two states in the country that do not have an equine liability statute. So in 48 other states, you walk onto a horse property and usually see, those big metal signs that say you're entering a horse property, it's governed by statute XYZ, and, there's already some built-in protection for assumption of risk and liability.
Mm-hmm.
California and Maryland don't have those. So that means, at least in California, I can't speak to Maryland, but you have to have a written release of liability document to get any of that protection. So that's probably one of the biggest distinct differences that I know, at least from practicing in both
Hmm.
California and Tennessee.
Yeah. So what are some of the similarities you've seen between California and Tennessee being licensed in both states?
Similarities, I think, obviously there's general
Hmm.
contract laws and that sort of thing,
Hmm.
work the same. I think more similarities obviously exist just across the horse industry. I'm working with clients and, you're buying a horse in Tennessee, you're buying a horse in California. A
Hmm.
lot of the same, you want to have the same inspections and all of that before you enter into those contracts. So that's
Yeah.
probably the biggest thing in terms of similarities.
Yeah. Okay. And then obviously you're not licensed in a lot of states, but where should people start to look if they're not in those two states to research about like equine or business based laws for their state?
Sure. In terms of specific laws, obviously, Google's a great source to enter in, like, if you're in Florida equine liability statute, and it'll bring it right up.
Hmm.
There's a lot of law school websites that bring up those statutes as well. So that's one. Another resource I often tell people who call from out of state would be to phone your local law library. Most counties have a law library, and it's different than your regular city library. All they have in a law library are law books.
Hmm.
So that would be another resource. Oftentimes, at least in my experience, the librarians and law libraries are very well versed and they can help. While they can't give legal advice, they'll certainly point you in the right direction of where to look for something. I'd also point out that my book, while I am only licensed in California and Tennessee, and there's certainly a few mentions of California law, I
Hmm.
really wrote it so that it really applies for the most part to anyone all over the country. I think it's really more broad, not state specific, just to give you ideas of things to think about, that sort of thing.
Yeah, no, no, that makes a lot of sense. So I think a lot of horse owners, when they think about law and horses, they either will do two things. Either they try and avoid it because they don't want to deal with it, they fear it, or they think, oh, this won't affect me. Why do I need a lawyer or a contract? Um, you talk about this in your book, but can you break down some of the misconceptions or misunderstandings the horse industry has when it comes to equine law and why owners, trainers, and riders shouldn't be so scared to deal with it or talk about it?
Sure. Yeah. I think the biggest thing is that I hear is from, either people who are buying a horse or selling a horse. Oh, well, I don't want to use a lawyer to draft the contract because I don't want to upset my trainer, or I don't want to make them think I'm over the top because I've got a lawyer, that sort of
Mm-hmm.
thing. And
Mm-hmm.
my response is generally like, hey, look, having someone who can actually draft a legal contract properly as opposed to a layperson is
Mm-hmm.
not only going to protect you and your interests, but it really protects the trainer. And in some ways, it protects the buyer or the seller, whoever the other side is,
Mm-hmm.
because it's going to be a well written document and it's going to provide transparency, which I think is oftentimes missing from a lot of these types of horse deals and whatnot. So it
Mm-hmm.
can certainly it just makes sure everyone is clear on, hey, here are the terms. Here are the warranties about the horse. Here's what's wrong with the horse if there's something that, you're disclaiming or something like that. So, um, I think when people actually stop and pause and sort of get it out of their head, like, oh, this is a big, scary lawyer person, but this is really just someone who's trying to make sure that everyone's on the same page before you buy an expensive horse or horse property or whatever. That's really one of the ways that I help people get through that.
Yeah, no, and I think a lot of people really kind of shy away from how much they think a lawyer is going to cost. And horses are expensive enough, as we both know.
Yeah.
So a lot of people are like, I don't want to spend money on a lawyer. Well, if you do your research ahead of time, you won't have to.
Exactly. Well, I like to, I tell people all the time, it's a lot less expensive to prevent a problem now than to untangle it after you've bought that bad horse. I mean, the number of times that I've had calls with potential clients who say, I've spent X amount of dollars on this horse and it's not what it was, represented, all of this
Mm-hmm.
stuff. And then, we go back and we sort of talk through how they got there. And it was really becomes clear, hey, if you had talked to me ahead of time, I would have suggested you ask these questions, or
Mm-hmm.
we would have written a contract that did this. And so that initial investment would have protected you from a much bigger problem down the road.
Yeah, and because and we'll probably talk about it later, but there's people that they'll buy a horse from their friend and they're like, "Oh, that's my best friend. I don't need a sales contract for this horse. You don't know what's going to happen." And so that's kind of how bridges get burned is people think, "Oh, they're my best friend. They'd never screw me over." Pardon my language, but it's important. So,
No, it really is. And actually in California, we have a specific statute that requires a written bill of sale for the any horse over $500. So, and there's some other states that have those statutes as well. So having a written sales agreement, and we also, that same statute in California requires the written disclosure of sales commissions. So, and what it provides for is treble damages. So, three times
mm-hmm.
the amount of damages. So, it can take a horse that wasn't too expensive. And if, there were commissions paid that weren't disclosed, that sort of thing, really bring it into a much more expensive case with damages that might make sense to litigate. So, again, having a written sales agreement is really important.
Yes, exactly. All right, so you've practiced this area of law for several years now. What are some of the most common cases you've seen? And with regards to privacy, are there any cases that have surprised you or made you do a double take?
Yeah. I think with regards to privacy, I mean, obviously, any lawsuit that's filed is public record. So there's not a lot of privacy if you get involved in a lawsuit. So what I often counsel my clients, and I work with a lot of different, types of clients and whatnot, is in certain circumstances based on family situation, it makes sense to have confidentiality clauses in contracts as well as arbitration clauses. Not arbitration's not right for everyone, certainly, but because it's private, but it is confidential. So
Mm-hmm.
if I'm dealing with a high net worth client or someone in an industry where they want to keep, their business private, we'll include an arbitration clause that if there's any dispute, it has to be taken care of in arbitration, not in court. And then also the confidentiality clause. So those are really the ways that we address those types of issues ahead of time,
Mm-hmm.
um, rather than, then again, if it's a regular lawsuit, it's going to be in the public eye. So,
Yeah, like if
and
it's,
that hurts. That doesn't help the industry. It doesn't generally help, it doesn't help
yeah,
the parties involved, all of that. So,
no, that because there's a lot of different lawsuits and stuff out there that kind of in cases that have kind of tainted our industry that we need to kind of keep them quiet. Um, and then so with an arbitration clause, basically that keeps things from not becoming a public record. Is
yes,
that
yeah,
okay?
arbitration is completely outside of the court system, and you hire a private arbitrator. Both sides pay for it. It's expensive though, so that's the
Mm-hmm.
big reason. Some people it doesn't make sense in certain circumstances.
Right.
But if it's a family that has, wants their expensive horse not to end up as part of, some sort of
Big case. Yeah.
public lawsuit or whatnot,
Mm-hmm.
so that's where it can really be helpful.
Yes, especially nowadays with social media and everything is online. So
Right. Yeah, exactly.
yep. All right. So this is also a topic that you had said that you've dealt a lot with, that we talked about over the phone, and that is very important to bring up. And unfortunately, can happen a lot in the horse world. Bad deals or scams. First, and I'm not trying to call anyone out here, but how do people fall into these problems and what causes them, in your opinion? And then how can these best be solved and what should people be looking out for to avoid getting into these types of situations?
I think, at least in my experience, the way I've seen people fall into these bad deals or scams is it's oftentimes someone who's buying a parent who's buying a horse for their child,
Hmm.
and they get their emotions get involved because they want to make their child happy. They want, oh, the trainer might be saying this is a great horse, but they might have some reservations, but they're brand new to the industry. So they're going to trust their trainer. But oftentimes, there's false pressures. The number of times I've had someone say to me, oh, well, they told us if we didn't decide today, the day we tried the horse, that we were going to move forward with the purchase, there's other people lined up to come and try the horse.
Hmm.
I mean, that's just, it's just such classic language that people say over and over again. And
Hmm.
I always tell clients you have to be willing to walk away from a horse. And I'm telling them also, if I'm getting to speak to them before they've gotten themselves into this situation, you
Hmm.
need to look at this as a business transaction, even if your child is involved.
Hmm.
Look at it from, a money standpoint. Most people that are buying horses have been successful in their life, whether it's in business, in some other way, because they've got the money to buy a horse, right? So,
Hmm.
how would you evaluate this deal in your business? What would you be asking those types of things? Well, ask yourself that again. You can still make that final decision. Okay, I want to do it for my child, but at least you're going to be more aware and less likely to get into those types of really bad situations.
Yeah, and unfortunately, that's when horse traders and even there's been some horse trainers, unfortunately, out there that have taken advantage of naive, naive parents or naive first-time owners, and they end up not even signing a contract. They just do a handshake and hand over a check to buy this horse, and then they take the horse home and he's lame, or they have to spend another $10,000 on vet bills.
Right.
Yeah, so for for that example, what questions should parents or first time owners be asking when they're dealing with that kind of transaction?
Yeah, one of the big things I think is trying to research the horse's background as much as you can ahead of time. Obviously, if you're dealing with, sport horses, there's going to be likely videos online that you can access if the horse has any sort of show record where there's been videos, that sort of thing. Another one, if you're dealing, say, though, with a horse that either hasn't shown or it's shown at more local shows where there's not a record of videos, asking around in
Mm-hmm.
the community, trying to do some due diligence. You can actually find out a lot of stuff on the internet these days. So, and again, asking to see the previous bill of sale, making sure that the current owner is the registered owner with whatever discipline that horse does. Those breed organizations or USCF, they're not definitive for ownership, but they
Mm-hmm.
can at least give you some clues. We've had cases where people don't even check that, and then a year down the road, someone says, "Oh, those people that sold you the horse didn't even own the horse," and then you go
Mm-hmm.
back and then you're sort of retroactively looking and go, "Oh, if they had just looked here, they would have seen." It would have been at least like, "Hey, red flag, we need to ask the seller about this," something like
Yeah.
that. So that's certainly an important way to try to prevent that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Also, not to and again, not this podcast is not about my book, but we do have a checklist that people can download in the back of the book. And I'm happy to even give you a QR code for your readers if you want to, if anyone's
Yeah.
interested in that as a way that people can, it's just a list we put together of, things to think about as you're buying a horse.
Yeah, and while we're on the subject of like bad deals, and then this is slightly different than sales, but like I've seen a lot of the social media posts that have come out with that you guys have been posting lately is talking about if someone is like running a business on your property,
Mm.
like you need to have a contract for that or something. And I think that's really important because like something could happen with one of those. If you have an instructor teaching lessons on your property and then their student gets injured on your property, it's your fault.
Right.
So yeah.
No, that's definitely, yeah. I'm glad you're looking at our social media. We spend a lot of time trying to really expand on educational topics in that, but that's one of the biggest things that we see with people that buy horse properties, regardless of what state you live in, is that you could buy it just thinking, oh, I'm going to have my own horses and I'm going to let my trainer run their business, not realizing that you're actually all of a sudden running a business yourself and exposing yourself to a lot of liability. So,
Hmm.
making sure that number one, you're aware of those risks, and then
Hmm.
talking to someone who can help figure out, okay, based on your jurisdiction, here's how we protect against those risks. And just in a very broad sense, that's generally going to be, making sure that you have well drafted contracts, making sure that that's so a contract, say if a trainer's running their business with you and the
Hmm.
trainer, and then if they have other clients, boarding contracts, something like that, making sure that you have insurance that protects you if someone gets injured on your property, your homeowner's insurance like 9 out of 10 times will not be that insurance. You need specific insurance. And then deciding, should I form some sort of entity to provide another layer of protection? I like to talk to my clients about an onion and lots of layers of protection between their assets and a lawsuit. So the more layers we have, the better, insulated and protected they are.
Yeah, no, yeah. I think your episode and then the episode I did with Cassidy previously where she's an insurance agent, I think they'll really collaborate well together.
Oh,
But
perfect.
yeah. But yeah, no, that's so right. Because you even talk about that. It even applies to if you have grooms or people working on your property that are, you're paying them, but if they have to have workman's comp or like you have to have something to protect yourself if something happens to them too.
Right, exactly. Yeah, no, and workers' comp and all of that is very state specific.
Hmm.
But certainly making sure that you have those protections if they're required by your state's laws is very important.
Yes, yes, exactly. Okay, so another problem that I think a lot of owners and riders are concerned about right now, and I know you've said that there's a lot up in the air about this, but I think it's important to at least mention is tariffs and how they can potentially affect prices of everyday costs and carrying of horses. And then, especially, I've heard a lot of people, because I know a lot of AQHA trainers and stuff import horses from other countries. What do you think this will affect ownership and showing overall from a lawyer perspective? What have you seen as far as this topic is concerned, and how do you think it will affect the industry?
Sure. I think, at least all indications are it's going to just raise the prices across the board with the
Mm-hmm.
tariffs on importing horses like the AQHA. And really, I know lots of different disciplines that import horses from
Yeah.
Europe and other countries. And what we're telling our clients to do right now is, make sure you're working with a broker who's very familiar with those resources and can really help you calculate those tariffs. It's sort of been a back and forth in the courts in terms of like, oh, they're in effect. Oh, now there's a ruling against it. Oh, now there's a stay against it. So
Yeah.
that hasn't, fully been played out in the courts just because it takes a while.
Yeah.
Um, I will say the American Horse Council is a great resource for anyone who has questions. They're a nonprofit based out of
Yes.
Washington, D.C., and they provide really up to date, accurate information on a lot of legislative issues for the horse industry. So, certainly, if people are wondering, oh, what's the status today? That's probably the first place I would go to try to look and see, okay, have they posted anything that's updated since their last update? Because they're pretty
Right.
up on sort of the status of those types of legislative issues.
Yes. No, I don't know if you can answer this or not, but is there any kind of what people should be prepared for them or
I mean, I think
just
you should be prepared to be paying, the
paying
10%,
more?
the a 10% tariff at this
Yeah.
point. It varies by country, but that's probably if you're shopping and looking for a horse in Europe, I would add that on so that you don't get to the border and go, oh, I don't actually have the money, that type of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
So that would probably be my biggest suggestion. Like, be prepared to pay those at this point until
Yeah.
things change. I mean, hopefully they change, but who knows?
Yeah, no, that's so good. That's good. All right. So You've talked about a lot today, and I could ask you more questions, but I don't want to keep you forever. Um, you have a lot of knowledge about the law and the industry, and such a passion for it. Is there any last little nuggets that you could give someone who might be dealing with some legal issues or potential issues, um, for their whether something comes up with a horse sale, their business, or whatever it may be, and how to help them?
Yeah, I think two things. Number one, don't put your head in the sand. If you have a legal issue, go ahead and find a equine attorney who's local to you or who's at least licensed in your state who can help you because you make your attorney's job a lot harder and more expensive the longer you wait most times. So really just, okay, I have a problem. I need to get some help. I need to get some advice, that sort of thing is the number one thing. And then I think the second thing that we touched on at the beginning, but I think it's really important, is there's so many things within the industry that can be prevented if you
Mm-hmm.
just take the time to like read, understand what the risks are and set things up properly from the beginning, whether it's you're a horse business or you're an individual buying a horse, really across the board,
Mm-hmm.
prevention is really key and it can put you in such a better place. I say to clients, look, there's no 100% protection here from a lawsuit, but you can put yourself in such a better place if
Mm-hmm.
you deal with things ahead of time. So those are probably my two big takeaway things.
Yeah. And then something I just thought of is, where do you think, like, as far as equine law and contracts and everything, compared with 50 or 100 years ago, where do you think it's progressed since then, and where do you see it go? Where do you see equine law going into the future?
I think, there's certainly less handshake deals, but there's still a lot of them. I think,
Mm-hmm.
50, 100 years ago, the horse was often used as a form of transportation, not as
Mm-hmm.
a pleasure sport horse. I mean, maybe in some cases it was a pleasure sport, but majority of horses, maybe 100 years ago at least, probably were more as, useful.
Mm-hmm.
So that just changes the dynamics of it. So where are we going in the future? I hope that we're going to, you know, a place where people are really able to protect themselves and, know the risks and then enter into the sport and enjoy it. Because I think, I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure you would agree with me, at the end of the day, there's so many great things about having horses in your lives.
Yeah.
And it's really sad when someone calls me up and says, "Oh, I wish I'd never gotten my daughter into this because of the legal troubles that they're having," or that type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Because when I really look at the industry as a whole,
Mm-hmm.
and the experience that I've had with it with horses, it's such a positive and how it can help so many. There's just so many positives. So really, hopefully, we're moving towards where people can really see that because they understand sort of the legal steps to take to so that they really enjoy the industry as opposed to dealing with problems in it.
Yeah, and like you mentioned earlier, a lot of first-time owners or parents buy a horse from a emotional. They start off emotional, they love their kids, they want to see their kids smile and riding their own horse and stuff. And so they're not always thinking about the logical side right off the bat. They're not
Hmm.
always thinking like, "Oh, my kid loves this horse. I'm buying this horse for him." Like no question. And they're like, "Wait a second. Hold on."
Yeah,
Take a minute, do
exactly.
your research.
Exactly. Yeah, I know, totally.
Yes, yep. All right. So, in your own words, how would you define an educated cowgirl?
Yeah, I love this question. I think it's someone who understands, the traditions and the realities of being in the industry, but also has critical thinking and, modern thinking in terms of what it takes to be successful in the industry. I think that's really what an educated cowgirl or cow person would be. So, yeah.
I love that. I love that answer. All right. So, for some fun rapid fire questions, what is one business tip or hack that you love as an owner, as a business owner, that you feel has led to the success in running a business that you have to share?
Always I don't sugarcoat anything when I talk to clients or potential clients. I'm pretty much a straight shooter. And I think that that just really um, leads to business longevity.
Yeah. Yeah. And are you pretty similar with your team?
Yes, yeah,
Yeah.
certainly with my team. Yeah, they know where they stand. They know, I'm gonna, oh, this marketing whatever didn't work or this didn't work, but let's do it this way. So, yeah,
Yeah.
certainly just being very straightforward.
Perfect. All right. If okay, so if you hopped on a plane tomorrow to anywhere in the world, where would it be and why?
I was I think I have a couple of friends that have done those horseback riding safaris where you get to ride horses and see these amazing animals. I think that's definitely one of my bucket list trips. So that would probably be yeah, that would be amazing just to see the animals in nature and get to horseback
Yeah.
ride. I was able to go when I was in college. I went on a horseback riding tour in the south of France for a week where you rode from like castle to castle, and it was just such a great experience. The most scared I've ever been on a horse, and I've ridden my whole life. But beyond that, it was a really great experience and just really fun. So yeah, that's probably what
No.
I would say.
Yeah. It's funny that you mentioned the safari rides because I have said the same thing in a previous episode about
Oh,
safari
really?
rides. So I can't remember which episode it was, but I've said that. So yeah. All right. So if you had the opportunity to try any discipline, which would it be?
Something I haven't tried before, I guess, is what you mean.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, yeah, probably reining. I've never done any sort of reining or real Western riding or anything like that. I've always been in an English saddle, and so that would probably be what I would choose.
Yeah, reining is pretty fun. One tip, the first like real reiner I rode was don't look down during the spins because you will throw up or you will it's the easiest way to get spun off.
Oh
Like
yeah.
like it's almost like in ballet when they tell you to pick a spot, it's the
Oh
same thing with
right.
spins. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
Yes.
Well, I'll keep that in mind if I get that opportunity.
Yeah. And then because you're in California, beach or mountains?
Mountains. Yeah. Where I live in California, we're an hour from the beach, but about 4 hours from, Lake Tahoe and the Sierra, Nevada. And I love the mountains. It's so beautiful.
Nice, nice. All right. So, Polly, this has been so much fun and so fascinating to get to step into your world and learn more about equine law and everything, and really talk about some important things from the horse perspective. Thank you again for reaching out to me and coming on the podcast. For those interested, where can they find you and Blue Ribbon Law book, Hay and Hay information on social media or contact your practice? And then where can they find the book?
Sure. The book's easy. It's on Amazon. It's called Blue Ribbon Law, and it's by Polly Hay. Um, we have a website, which is blueribbonlaw.com. So you can certainly find us there. We're on Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn. So all of those sites. And I do feel like we really try to just post educational content most of the time because that's really one of my missions. So, and if you need to get in touch with us, on our website is our phone number and email address and all of that.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you, Polly.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Educated Cowgirl. I hope you enjoyed it, learned something new, and will come back for more. In the meantime, if you would like to continue to support the show, make sure you hit that follow button on whichever platform you're listening on, follow me on social media, and make sure to leave me a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. And if you really want to share the podcast, make sure you tag me in your Instagram stories at The Educated Cowgirl. But for now, stay blessed and ride on, cowgirls.